afternoon, and we're pleased to have the good luck of having you with us for today's Friday the 13th Forum. I'm Sharon Van Sickle-Robbins, President of the City Club, and I would like to welcome you all, those of you here with us today at the Governor Hotel, and those of you listening on OPB or KBPS radio or watching on Portland Community Media's CityNet 30. Today's speakers will discuss the importance of the nursery industry to Oregon's economic health. But first, a few announcements. To begin, if you haven't already done so, why don't you please silence your cell phones? Next, I'm pleased to announce that we have extended our membership drive through the end of May. If you become a City Club member during today's Friday Forum, you'll receive $25 off the first-time member fee. And in addition, you'll receive a coupon for a free Friday Forum lunch that you can use anytime you choose throughout the next year. You can become a member using the membership forms on your table or at the back of the room. City Club staff will also be available after the forum to answer any questions you may have. There's really no better time to join than today. I'd like to thank our media partners, including Oregon Business Magazine, and I'd also like to offer our appreciation to the Friday Forum corporate sponsors whose generous financial support make these forums possible. Please join me in offering our sincere appreciation to our spring quarter sponsors, communications firm Morel Inc., utility firm Northwest Natural, and the law firms of Perkins Coie and Schwabe Williamson Wyatt. We are really grateful for your support. If your company or firm would like to be a City Club sponsor, please contact club staff at the back of the room or call the City Club office. Once again, we're going to be experimenting with something a little different during today's question and answer period. On each of the tables are pens and index cards, and during the forum, we invite you to write any questions you may have for our speakers on these cards. You don't need to be a City Club member to submit a question. Then during the board host question, club staff will collect the cards, select the best questions, and they'll get read from the microphone. City Club members are still welcome to come to the microphone, which is right here, to ask their questions during the Q&A, and we're certain you're going to come up with some great questions for today's panel. And now to our program. Most Americans think of farmland as amber waves of grain. For Oregonians, farmland often means verdant fields of Christmas trees, deciduous shade trees, and potted plants. In fact, Oregon is the second largest nursery state in the country. Last year, the industry brought $740 million in externally sourced income to the state. But the recession has hit hard as East Coast markets have dried up, and nearly 50% of growers are facing a potential loss of property that would hobble our readiness when the market revitalizes. Today, our panel of experts will discuss the importance of the nursery industry to Oregon's overall economic health. Introducing our speakers and moderating today's discussion is Mark Sytsma, an environmental scientist at Portland State University. He was recently appointed Associate Vice President for Research in the Office of Research and Strategic Partnerships. He has also served as Director of PSU's Centers for Lakes and Reservoirs, Chair of the Environmental Science and Management Program, and Associate Dean in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. Mark?
Thank you. Thanks for coming today. Our panel is going to introduce you to what could be called a hidden industry in Oregon, or the industry without doors. But first, before we get into that, let me introduce our panelists. To my right is Grace Dinsdale. Grace received a BA degree from Portland State in psychology and a Bachelor of Science degree in botany from Oregon State University. She gained initial business experience developing an ambitious fresh produce growing and marketing operation in 1978 through 1980. Discovering a passion for hard work and love for tackling tough challenges, she founded Blooming Nursery in 1982. Blooming Nursery is located in western Washington County, where they grow a broad selection of garden varieties of perennials and market them in a deep burgundy pot with the Blooming Advantage trademark. Her products are available only to independent garden centers, landscapers, and other growers, and their distinctive products are designed to assist the independents in differentiating themselves from warehouse discount stores. They grow about 2,100 varieties of herbaceous and woody perennials, grasses, herbs, and organic vegetables. They also sell liners and bare root starter plants to the trade for finishing. To Grace's right is Jeff Stone. Jeff is the executive director of the Oregon Association of Nurseries, and prior to that, he served as the association's legislative director. Prior to OAN, he served as 8 years as chief of staff to the Metro Council, and 8 years before that, working for U.S. Senator Bob Packwood. He currently chairs the Coalition for a Working Oregon, which is a coalition of business associations dealing with immigration reform. To Jeff's right is Dan Hilburn. Dan is currently the administrator of the plant division in the Oregon Department of Agriculture. He oversees the nursery, insect pest prevention and management, noxious weed, and native plant conservation programs in Department of Ag. He's a member of Oregon's Invasive Species Council and the State Weed Board. Before moving to Oregon, Dan served as plant protection officer in the Bermuda Department of Agriculture and Fisheries. Prior to that, he managed the insect identification lab for the Virginia Cooperative Extension Service. He has a bachelor's degree from Middlebury College in Vermont, MS in entomology from the University of Maine, and a PhD in entomology from Virginia Tech. The nursery industry in Oregon actually began before Oregon was a state. Henderson Llewellyn left Iowa with 500 plants in a wagon that he hauled over the Oregon Trail to start the first nursery in the state near Milwaukee. The following year, Llewellyn's neighbor in Iowa, William Meek, followed him to Oregon with another 200 varieties of grafted trees, and the two men formed the Llewellyn and Meek Nursery, the first nursery of grafted plant material on the Pacific coast. Through foresight or luck, Llewellyn and Meek picked an ideal place to start a nursery. Oregon is blessed with long growing season, mild winters, and rich soils, the ideal combination for growing plants. Their initial success has grown into the largest segment of Oregon agriculture and the second largest nursery industry in the U.S. There are over 2,000 nursery operations in Oregon that employ about 21,000 people. They lead the country in the number of acres in production and in the production of Christmas trees, potted azaleas, coniferous evergreens, and deciduous shade and flowering trees. The Oregon nursery commands about 18% of the sales in the entire U.S. market. The value of Oregon's greenhouse and nursery products topped $1 billion in 2007, and about over 3/4 of the product is shipped out of state, so it's a net importer of dollars into the state. The industry is tapped into the international markets in Canada and Mexico, and increasingly China are important markets for Oregon products. In recent years, as was mentioned previously, the industry has suffered from difficulty in obtaining financing, the collapse of the housing industry, and increasing fuel and transportation costs. Indeed, just about every issue that is important in this state has a nexus with the nursery industry: labor, energy, water, land use, pesticides, invasive species taxes. They all have something to do with the nursery industry, and I'm personally beginning to wonder if they might have something to do with the Blazers not making it through the first round of the playoffs. The industry is a diverse one that includes small mom-and-pop operations to large corporations. There are small specialty growers like my neighbor who specializes in peonies, and large multi-species operations. The retail markets are also diverse. They range from small garden centers to large big box retailers like Home Depot and Lowe's. It's an industry that produces products that beautify and enrich our lives. They restore our watersheds, clean our air and water, and provide many people with a stress-relieving, enjoyable hobby. Our panelists today are going to familiarize you with this major hidden industry in Oregon. Jeff and Grace are going to provide a more detailed description of the people involved in the industry, the unique combination of factors that make the industry an ideal fit for Oregon, the challenges faced by the industry in dealing with markets and products, and provide us with an overview of how the industry engages policymakers to address the multitude of issues affecting the industry. Grace and Jeff will do a sort of tag team presentation, with Grace providing a grower's perspective and Jeff providing a more industry-wide perspective. Then Dan will talk about how the industry is regulated in the state and how the state and industry collaborate to maintain this economically important industry in Oregon. So with that brief introduction, let me turn it over to Jeff to start the discussion. Thanks.
Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Stone, the Executive Director for the Oregon Association of Nurseries, and I'm very pleased to see the great turnout today. You haven't heard a lot about us because we are hiding all among you. You drive 20 minutes from the city, and you're going to find farmland and nursery land. You go down the street, and there's a retailer. The great thing about this industry is that it is a true sector that is collaborative, sharing, and passionate about plants. For Multnomah County, Multnomah County is the 5th largest in terms of dollars for the nursery industry, 4th in terms of the number of nurseries that participate. So we are all around. The membership is varied. It includes the small grower who loves unique plants, the people who go off all throughout the world to find something unique. I think of it as the Indiana Jones of plant material. They do go out and find it, and then we have to see if it will grow and sell. We also have to talk with our good friends from ODA to make sure it's not invasive or anything like that. We have that small person. Then we have the large industries, the Ferrari of the nursery industry that ships 35, 40 trucks a day to markets all over the United States. They are connected by geography. We are relatively a compact industry, from Boring to Eugene, if you think of it that way, all throughout the fertile Willamette Valley. We're both urban and rural. And we have a great advantage of having unmatched growing seasons, mild winters, and a neighbor on neighbor who's also a competitor, but also a collaborator. This industry also embodies what is great about Oregon, which is the handshake deal. It's as important as water, but if you're only as good as your word. And so the makeup of this industry is exciting. There's a lot of small, as I mentioned, growers, but I'm pleased to have the real person sitting to my left to talk about kind of what she brings and what she sees and why she wanted to be in this industry.
As Jeff mentioned, there's quite a diversity of different sorts of growers, people that have been brought into the industry for different reasons. Some people are second, third generation, and a number of people, probably a majority of people, have come to the industry on their own. Some people have come as a second career because they are passionate about plants and want to do something that's more connected with nature. Some people, like me in my own situation, I'm on the farm that I grew up on. So, starting a nursery is something that's approachable by someone who doesn't have a lot of capital but has a lot of energy. So in my case, that's what I did. I didn't have any capital. I knew I wanted to farm. I couldn't farm. I couldn't come up with the capital to get started, to buy equipment, to buy more land. Also in our area, in the metro area, it's just about unavailable to find the amount of land that's needed to have a viable farming operation. So in my case, I could use old materials, build a nursery out of that, and then work hard and eventually get to the point where I had enough cash flow to buy the family farm. So I think there's a number of people in the industry like that that have as a primary motivation keeping the farm in the family. Okay.
Next, we're going to talk about markets. And I know that's a big deal to the business community, so I want to try to give you a sense of what the marketplace is for the nursery and greenhouse industry. We are a true traded sector. People don't think of us or think of ag much in those terms, but we are a traded sector. We are a cluster. We're just as much of a cluster as the high-tech industry. We just don't have walls. And so we collaborate and have that type of economic force and impact to the state, but also our reach is throughout the nation. As Mark indicated, we ship 74% of our plant material across the United States. So 74% leave the state's borders. 2/3 of the plant material is outside of the Pacific Northwest. So if you take away the Pacific Northwest and Oregon, that's a substantial amount of plant material being exported. Now that's trees, shrubs, you name, you have it in your yard or in your community, we grow it, ship it, and I like to think that we export clean air. And so that is a big component of what we are. Half of our market, half of what gets shipped out is east of the Mississippi. So if you think of that as a 74% leaving the state, over half of that's to eastern markets. So all the challenges in getting product to market exist for this industry, plus the fact that we bridge that urban-rural divide, transportation infrastructure is a big issue. So domestically, we're dominant. Even California. California is the #1, if you're wondering who's the #1 nursery sector in the United States. It's California. California's #1 in anything they want to be in. But they ship fewer trucks outside of the state than we do. So it kind of gives you a print that we are a giant, a really hidden giant of ag production right here in your backyard. So we have big markets domestically. Internationally, if you think of plants going to Canada and Mexico, those are big ones. But as Mark indicated, China is one that we have warmed up to. The big concern was if you ship to China, will they grow it and then dump that plant material back on the market? Our Oregon Department of Agriculture is trying to talk us out of that paranoia. But I think that you're going to see that market grow over the next period of years. So we compete with other states that are closer to our customers than, say, the state of Tennessee can ship to Georgia a lot easier. So why do they buy Oregon plant material? Well, not sounding conceited, it's the best plant material in the world. And quality has always been the hallmark for the Oregon nursery industry. So you can get more growth of healthier looking plant or tree and get it, so people will ship it to another wholesaler, plant it in the ground and call it their own. Oh, that's cool, they paid us for it. But I want to try to give you a sense of the imprint and reach that this industry has throughout the country and economically. So that is the market. Do you want to talk about your market, Grace?
Yeah, as Jeff mentioned, most of the material that's grown here in the state is going out of state, and even half of it's going to the east. We are not doing that with our plant material, with the exception of our starter plants that we sell all over the country. But even so, most of our material stays in the Pacific Northwest. The local market consists basically of the box stores that are local and independent garden centers, re-wholesalers, landscapers, and then of course other growers. So we're serving the local market. Our primary focus is our finished plants, which go to independent garden centers throughout the Northwest. That market, of course, has come under quite a bit of pressure in the last few years because of the proliferation of box stores and the growth of their garden center share. And so a lot of growers are supplying that market. Some of us, a few of us, are supplying the independents, which is more of a niche and a smaller part of the market, a little bit higher end, a little higher price, and much higher expectation on the part in that market.
So we'll go to product. We're tag teaming. So product.
Yes. So now we're going to talk about products, and I guess I'm starting. So the thing that really is very different about the nursery industry versus just about any other industry is the fact, well, of course, food is this way too, but we have a very perishable product. We have to forecast when it's going to be sold, when is the market going to want that product, and then we have to start it in a time appropriate to have it ready. That can take anywhere from 8 weeks to 20 years, depending on what the product is. That can become extremely difficult to forecast, as you can imagine. I mean, even food products that are also perishable, it's a little bit more of a commodity situation, a little bit easier to react to market conditions, and plus the market's probably a little more stable. With the nursery industry, especially the last 3 or 4 years, it's been quite unstable and very difficult to determine when the market is going to recover, what is the market even going to look like it used to look, which it appears that it isn't going to. And we've had the benefit, I've certainly had the benefit of being in business for the last 30 years during a period of just incredible growth in the horticultural industry. And that was really fun. But that appears to be over, and we're into a very different phase now when we're all thinking hard, trying to figure out what this next phase is going to look like. What we know is it's going to be very different. It's already very different. Of course, these last few years have been very tough, as they have been for most all industries. And as you know, you've had to maybe wait for some products a little longer. People haven't been inventorying things in the way that they did in the past when sales were brisk. In our case, we can't just kind of wait to order until we see the demand. We have to kind of anticipate when the demand's going to be so that we can start whatever lead time we need to produce the product in advance to have it ready. Everybody is aware that at some point here, when things start to recover, there's going to be some opportunity for those that are still left standing. And so trying to shepherd your resources, keep your assets in a more liquid form so that you're ready to move when you need to move, being able to even find the plant material that you're going to need when it's time, it is a real challenge. And especially for the woody growers, trees in particular, shrubs that take a longer time frame. In my case, our product is mostly ready within a year. But even that, I'm finding very difficult to forecast because we also have, in addition to the market conditions that are prevalent right now, we also have, of course, the changing energy prices, which are affecting people's willingness to consume plants, the numbers of plants that they're willing to buy, the amount of disposable income they have to buy plants. I don't want to forget to mention the weather, which of course is huge for us. It's probably bigger than anything else. And then also the fact that people are downsizing in their houses. They're not having the enormous yards. There's fewer people looking for a suburban dwelling and more looking for townhouses, apartments, that kind of thing. So even the plant material that they're looking for is maybe not what it was 10 years ago. Now they're looking for things that are ready to go. They're already in mixed pots. They're bigger. They're cheaper. I mean, they're looking for a very different mix of plants, and trying to forecast what that's going to be going forward is a big challenge. Let's see. Another thing to, excuse me. So I think that's pretty much what I was going to say about product. So.
Well, I'll add that you can certainly appreciate the fact that when it takes a plant or a tree 20 years to grow, trying to decide what that market's going to look like at that time with factoring in behavioral changes, social changes, transportation costs, energy costs, availability of water, weather, competition. Does somebody all of a sudden decide that they want to, let's say it's a Japanese maple. Most people know what that kind of tree looks like. I have one. If everybody decides to plant that type of product, having oversupply hurts price. And then who do you sell to? I mean, is it the independent retail garden center? Well, if you have quality plant material, you'll be able to do that. But I equate it to trying to get into a helicopter to go land on an aircraft carrier and hoping the boat's there. Without any other changes, you have enough gas and directional beacons to land on there, but anything else that blows you off course, it is problematic. So you can appreciate the fact that Grace has to put in a lot of factors. They all have crystal balls. 5 years ago, the crystal ball was pretty much plant something, sell it. Now you have to be a little bit more deliberate. So if I could, I'll move into challenges and issues, and then we want to make sure there's enough time. Since you haven't had a lot of interaction with us, would like to have more questions from you than having you hear from us. We think that'd be a little bit more interactive. It's not as cool for the people on the radio, but you know, we'll go with that. The nursery industry is progressive, it's environmentally friendly, and it's a leader in ag. We are the moderate sector of agriculture. So there's a lot of folks who look at the nursery industry and the wine industry that they're not really farmers. I would beg to differ. If you like to breathe and drink wine, you like the wine industry and the nursery industry. If you like to eat, we love our farm community, but they're all integrated. And we're also very active politically in our state capital and our nation's capital. As we mentioned, the nursery industry has many of the same pressure points as businesses do that you all are involved with. It's how to get product to market, it's energy costs. For us, we're very water dependent, and so having that available, and then the big fights over whether or not land should be used for agricultural purposes or for development purposes. What about invasive species? All those things that can lead itself, especially in invasive species, to regulation. We are good partners about making sure that we work with our Department of Ag and cities about not growing things that are invasive. Now, let me clarify that before you ask me a question, that just because it's not invasive here, I mean, if it's invasive here, that's one thing. If it's not invasive for that plant in Ohio, you know, then the big question is how do you grow that and kind of what the ethics of that might entail. But we have a couple exciting initiatives. There's a climate-friendly nurseries project, which is to talk about what's our carbon footprint, because we ship so much to our market. What is the net carbon offset? I mean, what's the net carbon footprint that we have? That's exciting. We're also pursuing a 25% reduction in energy in 10 years. So we're working actively with the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance and others to try to get to that point. Let me give one case in point. Tom Fessler, who is a grower down in Woodburn, reduced his water use by 60% by going to a different type of irrigation. More importantly, he changed the way he did energy, and he saved 75% off his cost for providing energy to his nursery. Now, he's a pretty big nursery, but let's put it in context. His savings off the grid would power the town of Independence for a year. So the best power supply that we can provide in terms of efficiency can be what we don't use. So that is an exciting thing. As Mark also mentioned, no one has been more of a leader on the labor front than the nursery industry. Comprehensive immigration reform and the availability of labor is a key component of how we get our work done. And so I'm happy to talk about any of those issues with the City Club today. The biggest problem, of course, is that not a lot of our young people are wanting to go into farm work. The iPad generation is not the greatest generation. And my kids certainly would rather focus on their Wii than learning how to go out and plant. Now, we don't give them a choice, and they're good kids, they mean well, but the days of people growing up on the farm and having examples of people who grew up on a farm, grace is becoming less and less. And that is something that we need to deal with as a community about how do we grow great things. And so I just got the hook from my good friend, Mr. Hilburn. But one last stat. What would happen if the undocumented workers left the state? We asked this question. The business community asked this question and asked a whole bunch of them that we didn't know if we wanted to know the answer to. So what would happen to the state of Oregon, their economy, if undocumented workers were forced to leave? The economy of Oregon would contract by $17 billion. That's businesses going out of business, suppliers. We have some suppliers in the room today that depend on the nursery industry. You have fertilizer companies, you have transportation folks, you have a variety of different industries that depend on agriculture, restaurants, you name the type of business that may employ folks that fit that description. There is political consequence to that if bad laws are passed. I mean, so I throw that number out because I think it's important to recognize how important a labor force is for us to get our product grown, but also to the economy of Oregon and why it matters. Do you have anything that you'd like to?
Well, just to, related to that is also the fact that a lot of people have left, a lot of guest workers, documented and undocumented, have left the area because of some of the failure of some of the larger nurseries or certainly the restriction of a lot of nurseries. There's just not as many jobs available. And so I'm concerned, and a lot of us are concerned about what's going to happen when things do pick up, what we're going to do for workers, and especially if we don't get some legislation moving forward to give us the ability to have legal workers here and to grant some amnesty to a lot of the people that have been working, paying taxes, being involved in their community for the last 20 years that don't have documents. So that's definitely, and that we all depend on in our nurseries still. Not me personally, of course, but but I'm sure there are some people like that. So yeah, I think that the labor problem going forward, as things start to recover, we're going to have an acute shortage of nursery laborers.
Well, I've been asked to now shift the discussion over to Dan Hilburn. I am pleased to have Dan up on the podium with us. It's very rare that a business group likes its regulator, but the fact is that Dan's going to show you all the reasons why we love the Oregon Department of Agriculture.
Well, thank you, Jeff. And it's an honor to be here today at the City Club, and it's a pleasure to be on this panel with people that I know and respect from the nursery industry. My role today is to talk about regulation of the nursery industry, and it's always a challenge to make regulations sound interesting. But in this case, I think you'll be surprised at the exceptional nursery regulatory system that we have in Oregon and the innovations coming online. In this state, if you sell more than $250 worth of plants in a year, you have to buy a nursery license. The license is good for a year, and the cost of the license depends on the nursery's annual sales. A small nursery with less than $20,000 in sales will pay $112. A medium-sized nursery with $1 million in sales would pay $750, and a very large nursery might pay $15,000 a year for their nursery license. The maximum license fee is $20,000 a year for nurseries with annual sales over $40 million. And in the past, we've had half a dozen nurseries paying the maximum. There are none at that level today due to the economic downturn. In addition, the industry taxes itself to support research through a research assessment that is also on a sliding scale. A small nursery contributes $10 per year, an average size one a few $100s a year, and the larger nurseries kick in several $1,000s a year each to support research. Finally, the industry taxes itself to support an emergency fund to address pest and disease emergencies that might impact nurseries. This fund was tapped recently to eradicate an infestation of Japanese beetles at PDX. Total license fees collected amount to about $1.6 million a year. A similar license fee brings in about $260,000 per year from Oregon Christmas tree growers. Together, these two funds support 11 full-time inspectors at Oregon Department of Agriculture, plus a program manager and a clerical support person. The people in our nursery Christmas tree program spend October through December inspecting Christmas trees, The rest of the year, they're in nurseries. The program is 100% funded by the industry. Your tax dollars are not at work in the nursery regulatory program. As of today, there are 4,323 licensed nurseries in Oregon. Another 705 businesses grow Christmas trees. So together, the 11 ODA inspectors cover about 5,000 operations, or an average of 450 per inspector. From mid-February through May, the inspectors race from one nursery to another, inspecting nursery stock and issuing health certificates, officially known as phytosanitary certificates, or just phytos. The Oregon nursery stock goes all over the world, and each destination has different requirements. Many of them require inspections for specific pests or plant diseases of concern to the receiving country. And here are a couple of examples from the past couple of weeks. This is a phyto from a nursery in Molalla, shipping plant material to Switzerland. 940 plants of 5 different varieties, and they needed to be inspected for harmful bacteria, viruses, virus-like organisms, and they had to be free of fruit and flowers. And here's another phyto. This is for a nursery in Boring. They're shipping plants to the Netherlands, 105 holly plants of 3 different varieties. And these had to be certified to be healthy with respect to bacteria, virus-like organisms, and 3 separate nematodes, which are of interest to the Netherlands. Last year, 7,132 phytos were issued for shipments destined to 55 countries. Oregon is mainly an exporter of nursery stock, but ODA was notified of 2,770 shipments of imported stock coming into the state in 2010, and we inspected about 10% of those shipments because they were coming from sources we consider to be high risk for bringing pests or plant diseases into Oregon. Next, I'd like to mention an interesting issue and challenge for the industry and the department: invasive species. Harmful non-native pests and weeds are a double-edged sword for the nursery industry. On the one hand, exotic diseases like Phytophthora ramorum, also known as sudden oak death, threaten the industry with direct losses through disease infections, and more importantly, indirect losses through restrictions and lost markets from quarantines imposed by countries and states. As you'd expect, the nursery industry is our biggest supporter for keeping all sorts of harmful pests, plant diseases, and weeds out of Oregon. On the other hand, some plants introduced via the nursery trade have become noxious weeds, so the industry is also part of the problem. English ivy that drapes many of the trees in natural areas here in Portland is a well-known example. The yellow flowers of Scotch broom that I saw on my way here today are another reminder. Both were introduced and sold for decades as ornamental plants. Understandably, the industry is concerned about what plants are added to prohibited plant lists and noxious weed quarantines. Today, English ivy and Scotch broom have been phased out of the nursery industry. It is illegal to import, propagate, or sell them in Oregon. More recently, butterfly bush has also been prohibited. A decade ago, land managers began to notice butterfly bush thriving on riverbanks, roadsides, and clear cuts. It showed all the signs of becoming as weedy as Scotch broom. The department started phasing out butterfly bush in 2008. After the state weed board added it to the official list of noxious weeds, I reluctantly cut down the 3 bushes in my yard. I love butterflies, so it was not something I wanted to do. However, this story is going to have a happy ending. The industry responded to our regulations by developing new seedless hybrid varieties analogous to seedless grapes or seedless watermelon. We adopted a 98% reduced fertility requirement and set up a process for independent review of fertility trials through Oregon State University. A dozen new seedless varieties have been approved in the past few months. Soon they'll begin to trickle down to garden centers and catalogs. These complex interspecific hybrids can't revert to the wild type, and they produce little, if any, viable seed. I'm holding a couple of spots in my yard for them. In reviewing the approval paperwork, I've seen pictures from the trials, and the plants are spectacular. They are compact, they have more flowers and longer blooming periods than the older seeded varieties, and they still attract butterflies. And this is a big deal, and not just for me. It is the first time plant breeders have considered and successfully addressed invasiveness in developing new ornamental varieties. Oregon is leading the way. Regulators and plant breeders all over the country are watching us. Hopefully, butterfly bush is just the beginning. Oregon State University has recently hired a young plant breeder, Dr. Ryan Contreras, to develop new ornamental varieties. I toured his lab, greenhouse, and field plots last week. He's started work on a dozen different types of plants, from Norway maple to ornamental grasses. In several cases, sterility to prevent invasiveness is a primary goal of the breeding. Oregon is also leading the way on testing systems approaches as an alternative to endpoint inspection for nursery stock. Visual inspections are not very useful for sudden oak death and other cryptic diseases. Dr. Jennifer Park and others at Oregon State University have been looking at nursery production systems to identify the critical control points where diseases are introduced. Oregon Department of Agriculture has taken their research results and turned it into a pilot project called the Grower Assisted Inspection Program, or GAPE, that trains nursery personnel on best management practices addressing the critical control points. Early results are encouraging, and several studies are underway to compare traditional endpoint inspections with systems approaches. I'll close by saying I see a bright future for the Oregon nursery industry. Our mild weather, long growing season, and low pest and disease pressure give us a natural advantage over other regions. Combined with a progressive and cohesive industry, good research support from Oregon State University, and well-funded and well-trained regulatory oversight from Oregon Department of Agriculture, we've got a winning team. If it ever warms up this spring and you get a chance to visit your local garden store, notice the variety and quality of the locally produced plants you have to choose from. We're truly blessed. While you're there, if you see any of the new seedless butterfly bush varieties like Blue Chip, White Icing, or Peach Cobbler, and are seduced into buying some by the gorgeous pictures on the label, remember, save some for me. Thank you.
Before I introduce our Friday Forum host, if you have written a question on one of those index cards, just hold them up now and City Club staff will come around and grab them. The first question for our speaker, as always, will be from our Friday Forum host. Today's host is City Club Governor Leslie Moorhead. Leslie is a consultant providing financial management services for small business. She served on City Club's research board for 5 years and is currently the secretary of the Board of Governors. She received the club's Research Award in 2007 and the club's Member of the Year Award in 2010. Leslie?
Thank you, Sharon. I'd like to say to the panel that I want to vouch for all of us city dwellers and tell you how much we appreciate everything you do. We love our Christmas trees and our azaleas and our irises and peonies and everything you do to produce these and keep the quality so high. But, or I should say, and we also love our food products, our locally grown food products, all the things that show up at farmers markets and in the grocery stores, and of course our beer and locally grown grapes. So this question is for each one of you to answer from your various perspectives. What is the future for Oregon nurseries as there is more pressure from food markets for locally produced food? What is the financial tipping point for nurseries to switch from growing landscape trees to growing beans or hops or other food-related products?
Wow, that's a loaded question. Thank you. I guess I'll take the first crack at it, and then everybody else can refute me. The tipping point is whether or not we believe that markets will rebound. It is a law of supply and demand. So because we have such great growing capacity, the method of production will lend itself to just as much about what is produced as how it's produced. So if it needs to be locally grown organic food, if that works for the type of production method that you have, it's not like a jet boat that you can all of a sudden switch and do a different kind of production. You have to plan in advance and try to do that in a meaningful way. I think the answer to you is that I'm seeing other growers get more involved with tree fruit and other types of plants that will blend into their current type of product mix. Whether or not that ultimately tips and says that we're going to be more of a blueberry grower, then we'll see how that is. We have examples of that. Fall Creek, just down the road near Eugene, is one of the biggest blueberry growers in the world. But no one knows that. You would drive by it and not even know. But I'll let Grace talk about the pressure of how you make those type of decisions.
Well, I mean, growing edible or plants that produce edible material is one thing, and then growing the material itself, growing beans, is a whole different sort of operation. So I think that, I don't know how many nurseries also grow some food crops. I think that's not that uncommon. A lot of us have other acreage and we're using that for different purposes. But the nursery industry really is centered around growing plants. And as that has constricted some, maybe some operations have gone out of business and those have been picked up by other, maybe more traditional farmers. That ground might go into food production rather than in nursery production. But the market for plants, vegetable plants, fruit trees, berries, that kind of thing, has definitely improved over the last few years, and so a lot of growers are growing those crops. Is there anything you want to add to that?
As always, we will now take questions from the floor. This will include at least one question from one of our audience members from the index cards. With this exception, asking questions at Friday Forums is a privilege of City Club membership. Before asking your question, please identify yourself as a City Club member and ask your question in 30 seconds or less. For those of you who are regulars, I have my trusty question mark card, and if I hold it up to you, it means that we have not heard the question yet and we'd like to. So first off, I'm going to start with the Q&A from the floor, and I'll slide in and ask an index question here.
Okay, I'm Ann O'Neill, a member of City Club, and this is a question for Grace. If I understand your business correctly, you produce the elegant styled planter displays that tempt we consumers, when we go to our local nursery store, tempt us to try new and interesting varieties. So this is kind of like display windows for clothing stores, it strikes me. It's a very artistic and stylish endeavor. So how do you figure out what the themes are and the things that people are interested in? How do you make us, in a way, or tempt us into new style trends for our gardens?
Well, to start with, I think you're giving us too much credit. We aren't doing a lot of combination planters, and we're not really doing a lot of display type things. We're growing a lot of great diversity of plant material, and very colorful, lots of foliage color, flower color, and everything. That then goes to the independent retailer, who a lot of those people put together just incredible combinations and displays. We try to suggest things that would make nice mass that they really need to have a lot of because they're just incredible and people are going to buy them. But it's really up to them to put those together into those seductive displays.
Steve Arnold, City Club member. What is the income distribution in the industry between high-paying jobs and minimum wage jobs?
I'll take that one. That's a very good question. It is farm labor, but we're proud to be able to look everyone here at the City Club in the face and say that we pay the second highest average wage in America for farm work. We average $10.45 an hour. Now that may not seem like a lot, but when people are talking about piece rate, we're a year-round ag industry, so having year-round work is what we're after. You also see a lot of people provide health care insurance and the ability to succeed and move up in terms of authority. You're seeing a lot of folks who've been with the nursery industry 20 plus years. And so the type of relationship that the nursery industry has with its employee is one of great affection. It's one that we depend on workers to make sure that we get those plants grown. I went out and worked a day at a nursery, and I can tell you how hard they work, and I just was just glad that I didn't cut any of my fingers off. Yes.
I'd like to add just a little bit to that, and that is that farm workers do work incredibly hard, and they have always been on more or less the lower end of the pay scale. And that's something that, you know, although I think we do a better job here in Oregon with that than in a lot of other places, it's something that's it's really important to remember that those wages are not, I think, as high as they really need to be for the work that's being performed. And the only way that that's going to be able to go up is if we're able to raise our prices, which is very difficult to do. It's impossible to do in this market, but all ag products need to be, the prices do need to go up in order to be able to pay the farm workers more.
I'm going to jump in here and ask one of the questions from the audience. Has the Oregon nursery industry analyzed whether climate change is going to make Oregon more competitive or less competitive in the U.S. nursery market going forward?
We're not liking the climate change that we're having right now. Sorry. Go ahead.
The climate change issue is one that I think Oregon is very well positioned to try to help with. We grow an enormous amount of trees, shrubs, a variety of different items that can be replanted and grown and have an environmental offset that we believe will have an impact on this issue. If you look at the great way that we grow our forests here and the great bevy of capacity for this industry to grow plant material, it can't help but help that issue. Now, we're very excited about talking to our congressional members about environmental offsets for transportation. So if you're going to build new transportation infrastructure, you need to have plants, trees, bioswales, ways that can mitigate the impact of that transportation system. So if you look at the life cycle of maintenance and cost, it's not only to the transportation road, but it's to the climate. So I think that Oregon is well positioned to be a leader. I can tell you that I just came back from a national meeting with my compatriots. We're the first ones to really be talking about it. Us in the state of Florida, I'm excited to say, that are the only ones talking about how do we then turn that into a climate benefit.
Question mostly for Jeff, but anyone who wants to chime in. I'm wondering, since you mentioned immigration reform and how important it is for the industry, obviously Obama made a big speech, but people are saying, well, they'll never pass the House. And I'm wondering, what's your sense of, you know, how far away we are from progress on that issue? And I'm also wondering how healthcare reform is affecting the nursery industry, and if your employees have health insurance already, or if they'll be getting insurance because of healthcare reform.
Just two non-controversial issues of immigration reform and healthcare. On immigration, I wish I could report that I have a lot of enthusiasm about something being passed this year. The window of immigration reform left about 4 months ago. Now we're into an election cycle of a president, a Congress that is still trying to figure out what it wants to be. The big problem with immigration reform is that you want to look at ways that you can increase visas for people to come here. Second, what do you do with the folks that are already here? And so there's some adjustment of their status so that those people are no longer undocumented. And then third, how do you deal with the employer dealing with making sure that all their employees are legally working. So there's electronic verification, which I think will be part of a comprehensive reform. But you have to deal with we have to deal with the way to have visas coming in and dealing with the members that are already here. So comprehensive reform, I'm very proud of the president going into the state of Texas and making a speech about the need for comprehensive reform. Unfortunately, I think that's all it was a speech. And the Latino community and the ag community and the business community needs comprehensive reform. On healthcare, I'll answer that in two different ways. We have a lot of members who want to make sure that all their employees don't use the emergency room as their primary way of dealing with healthcare. That's not only a problem with agriculture, it's a problem generally. And so how do we break that? Because that's a really high input cost for healthcare. I would say that ways that the healthcare bill was paid for had some problems. There was fining folks who didn't file what they call a 1099 form. If you had over $600 of any type of transaction, you'd have to file what they call a 1099 form. Congress knew that was a mistake as a way to pay for it and have repealed it, and the president signed the repeal. So the great angst that the nursery industry had about certain elements of the healthcare reform, now regardless if you think that everybody should be covered and how they should be covered, how you pay for it is as important as how you provide it.
Hi, Britt Conroy, City Club member. Just want to drill down a little bit deeper, if you don't mind, into the immigration matter, and specifically what the industry would like to see a guest worker program look like, and how your version of that program would be an improvement for both employers and employees over past programs. Thanks.
I think that's an excellent question, and thank you for raising it. Do you mind if I answer it? Okay. The current construct of how visas happen is through an H-2A program, which is for agricultural workers, and H-2B program, which is for non-agricultural workers. And so, but those have limitations on how many people can come in under each of those visas. The problem with the current construct of how visas are issued by the United States is that it is fairly rigid. So we have this awful spring, for example, and we have workers come in that are supposed to arrive in February and leave in July. Well, now with such a bad spring, maybe we don't need them until late March, and we need them later. Under the current way that visas happen is that the people would have to leave halfway when you need them. So there's a lack of flexibility. What would I like? I would like a visa system that is market-based. So when the economy is good and we need more workers to come in, that there's a way to give those visas to willing workers who are willing to come here and do the work. Conversely, you want to try to make sure that it doesn't become a one-way street. With the way that the border issue is currently talked about, and frankly, folks from south of our border are vilified, is that we're going to close the border. Well, closing the border may keep people out. It also keeps people in. And so that's the problem, is that you don't want to enable the coyotes and all those folks who put a price on getting over the border. What we should have is a legal visa program that takes the guesswork out of it. So no guesswork for guest workers. And I forgot the other part of his question. Do you remember the other part of his question? Oh. Well, it's how do you improve the employees' standing? But there isn't this mass cabal of employers taking advantage of employees. Now, where that happens is we refute it. We think it's reprehensible. What we want to try to do is make sure that people who are come here to work and pay taxes have the ability to do that, and therefore they're not subject to any type of shenanigans that might come their way.
We have run out of time for questions for today, and we'll have to wait till the next time we're together. Join us next week for a discussion about how our state government can best help care for Oregonians in crisis. And as we close, please join me in expressing our appreciation to today's guests, Grace Dinsdale, Dan Hilburn, Jeff Stone, and Mark Sytsma. We're adjourned.